So the problem is that if they look at their water demand, so the water consumption throughout the year, that is actually dropping. And one of the reasons that they talked about was actually energy prices. And they said that weirdly, that energy prices have more of an effect on water consumption than water prices. So, if your water is too expensive, it's actually because your energy is too expensive because you're having a hot shower, you're using it for your dishwasher, your washing machine.
Welcome to the Urbanista, where we discuss the water management challenges of Nordic cities. From safe drinking water distribution and stormwater collection to building sustainable urban living environments. Here is your host, Delphine Vesalo.
Hey, welcome back, Urbanistas. Today we are starting a new section here at the Urbanista in collaboration with GWI, Global Water Intelligence. We will go through the main events and news making the headlines in the water industry. What has been the discussion in the latest weeks or months? And what is the commentary about that? And precisely to illuminate us, with us today here at the Urbanista, we have Tallulah Lutkin, Utility Performance Editor at Global Water Intelligence. Hello, Tallulah.
Yeah, hi, Delphine. It's really nice to be here and to be presenting the exciting news that we're hearing from the water industry at the moment.
So, for those who have been following the Urbanista, for Tallulah is already an all-known face or voice if you are just listening. But yes, we have been already having quite interesting discussions with her. But today we have 4 pieces, or maybe 5. Let's see how it goes with the time. We have 4 pieces of information that we consider that are the latest news that you working in a water utility, you being involved in the water management in all kind of facets. These are the things that you should know, absolutely. So if we start, Tallulah, there is some update on the European regulation, some amendment to the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. So
That's right.
There has been a lot of discussion in the European Parliament. So what happened?
Yeah, so I feel like we've been talking about the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive for a while, but this specific amendment that happened this last month is to the polluter pays clause. So that's this question of all these micropollutants that we have in the environment, pharmaceuticals, forever chemicals, microplastics, who's going to pay to clean that up? And initially, the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive had a 100% polluter pays clause, right? So the companies, the pharmaceutical companies, the chemical companies who are producing these chemicals were going to pay for the cleanup. And now that has been scaled back. So obviously, we're imagining intense lobbying by the pharmaceutical and the cosmetic industry to reduce that to 80%. So that still sounds like quite a lot, 80%. But then that 20% shortfall is going to be covered by national budgets. So the budgets of Italy, Spain, all the European countries are going to be paying for this to front the bill for the cleaning up the micropollutants in our water. And so according to our estimates, that's about 240 million euros per year that have to come out of the national budgets to pay for the micropollutant cleanup.
Would that be any impact for the end consumer? I mean, the customers of the utilities, or how do you see the thing happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So we say national budgets, right? But we all know that means taxpayer, and it could also mean ratepayer as well, right? So there've been some organizations representing water utilities in Europe who've already said that there's going to be some impact for the ratepayer. Tariffs will have to go up to pay for this cleanup, this 20% that's now in the amendment. So it's not completely final because the Council of the European Union still is supporting the 100%. So it could be amended again, but actually our sources think that that's not very likely, that there probably is going to be this extra 20% that, like you say, the national budgets, i.e. the ratepayers, are probably going to have to front in some aspect.
Well, let's keep tuned on that, because talking about tariffs, we have another note at the end, but yeah, we'll need to digest all these increases. All right, so that was the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. Next, and this is something I would like that you elaborate a bit more, the leading utilities of the world. And actually, let's frame this. in the last was it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? I don't know.
Yeah, it was
In
a couple of weeks ago,
Amsterdam, in Amsterdam, there were two main events that go hand in hand: the Amsterdam International Water Week, as well as the related exhibition Aquatech. So, two new utilities inaugurated into the leading utilities of the world. What does it mean to be a leading utility of the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, Leading Utilities of the World is the sister organization to GWI, and what it really is a network of the most innovative and advanced utilities in the world. So, we really have members from all across the globe. Singapore, obviously, we have from Australia, Korea, all the way through Europe and North America. So, it's really the top utilities that are leading the way in innovation. And innovation doesn't necessarily mean technological innovation. It can, of course. It can be, using data, AI. It can be the new latest wastewater treatment. But it can also mean, being innovative in the way that you handle your tariffs. It can be innovative in the way that you handle your community and your stakeholders. So it's really basically bringing together all those great ideas and the utilities that are fronting them, and bringing them together so that they can discuss and share ideas, and also share those ideas with the world and inspire the world with what they're doing.
So really leading the way, paving the way for others to follow. And we have, in this edition, we have two NSVA, I guess that's it because it's from Sweden, Malmö, and Barwon Water from down under, Victoria, Australia.
Exactly, yeah. So it's really interesting, the two utilities, so the latest members of leading utilities of the world that we're inaugurated, like you said, during the Amsterdam International Water Week, which is really one of the big events of the year for the water community. So two very opposing, locations geographically, Sweden versus Australia. You can imagine their water resources are probably quite different. We know that Sweden's quite water rich. They don't really have so much of a water supply problem, whereas down in Australia, obviously water scarcity is a huge issue. But what we saw what's really interesting is that despite their differences, these utilities are actually quite similar in the innovations that they presented. They're relatively small, around sort of an average about 300,000 customers, which means that they're really good at engaging their stakeholders, engaging their community, and then leveraging that proximity that they have with their community, which as water utilities is really important to have that social capital and to be able to engage with your community. And they're also doing loads of stuff on circular economy, which I'm really excited to tell you about as well.
Actually, if I can just read, because this was particularly nice to see, the case of NSVA from Malmö, developing a new sewage system where food waste, gray water, and black water is separated, meaning the wastewater treatment plant can produce more recycled water, biogas, and nutrients. Talk about circularity. I mean,
Exactly.
this is a combination of many things, but looks really, really, really appealing, really promising, actually.
Yeah, it's really positive. And what they've done is they've created this kind of showcase lab. So it's called Rico Lab. And it's a place where they can both test this new idea of having source separated sewers. And they can also showcase what they're doing to their community, right? So that's what I was saying about stakeholder engagement, about bringing everyone around this idea. And so, yeah, what they're doing is really, really cool. I think it's the largest source separated wastewater treatment plant in the world. And so what they do is they collect the grey water separately from the food waste, separately from the black water, which they collect through a vacuum sewer, which sounds very cool. And the fact that you have this source separation means that you can actually extract more of the resources that you then have, right? So you can extract more biogas from the black water. You can recycle more of the grey water as well back into drinking water standard, which can then be used for industrial purposes, for example. And the food waste is also a really good way to increase the biogas production. So there's a lot of research out there about co-digestion. So if you use sewage sludge with food waste, you get more biogas, more energy than if you just did the sewage sludge. And also the fertilizer as well, so they can extract a lot of that. So they're really getting a lot out of that test facility. It's very, very exciting.
Well, that sounds, quite complicated, but that's a lot of things there. And the innovation coming from down under, Barwon Water from Australia is not lagging behind. This co-location to improve circularity. I like. Okay, first with hydrogen, providing green energy and recycled water for producing green hydrogen. and secondly, greenhouses. Let me see. I mean, am I understanding this correctly? Oh, okay, yeah. Can you elaborate on this?
Of course, yeah. So I think this idea of co-location is really important. It's this idea that a wastewater treatment plant it used to be considered just a way of treating all the gross waste that we had. But now with trying, what these utilities are doing is thinking of a wastewater treatment plant as actually a resource production facility, right? So a wastewater treatment plant can produce a lot of different things, namely energy, can produce fertilizer, it can produce heat, it can produce obviously water, cleanish water. And yeah, so all these things are things that other facilities, for example, a hydrogen plant, could use. And so the director of Barron Water, who we inaugurated, Sean Cummings, said he wants to have this new concept, which would be, so we have green hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced through renewable electricity. And he would like to call it fluorescent green hydrogen, which would be hydrogen produced with green electricity from wastewater treatment plants and recycled water from wastewater treatment plants. Because obviously, what do you need to make hydrogen? You need water and energy. And those are two things that a wastewater treatment plant actually can provide.
Fluorescent. Okay, there we go. So we have a new brand name patent there to be patented. All right. Great. So more things coming. Actually, it seems that a lot of things happened in Amsterdam recently. More things coming from the Amsterdam International Water Week. And this was particularly appealing because, to be honest, also part of our guys were visiting there, both the Water Week and Aquatech. And this was precisely one of the things that when they came back to Finland, say, hey, look at this. This sounds super promising. Greenhouses powered by wastewater treatment plants.
Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah, it's really exciting. And it's also something that I had not heard of. I'd heard of the hydrogen thing before. I'd not heard of the greenhouse aspect. But again, when you think about it, it just makes so much sense, right? So what does a greenhouse need? A greenhouse needs energy. You need to be able to, cool or heat, because some greenhouses are cooling and some greenhouses are heating. So in any case, you're going to need energy to do that. You might need heat. Again, if you're a heating greenhouse, you're going to need fertilizer, obviously. Again, that's something that wastewater treatment plant can very easily provide. And you're going to need water as well. So from the conversations that I've had, the idea of using water from a wastewater treatment plant in a greenhouse is not for irrigation, because obviously there are still those concerns. If the food is for human consumption, there would be some issues there. But you're still going to need water, for example, in your cooling system. You're going to have water circulating, even if it's not necessarily for irrigation. So there's so many synergies there with these greenhouses and what the resources that a wastewater treatment plant can provide. So it's really very exciting. And I think it's all the more exciting that we're really seeing a lot of conversations about this water, food and energy nexus. So COP28 is coming up, and the Water Day at COP28 is actually the Water and Food Day. So it's really interesting. And when we think about water and food, we obviously think about water scarcity. We think about irrigation, how do we do smart irrigation? How do we ensure that we're not, using water intense agriculture in water scarce areas? But I think that this greenhouse, this new sort of greenhouse idea is really exciting because it's about, using technology, using smart technology and using the resources that we have in a wastewater treatment plant to also grow food and to enable us to be food secure in the world. So it's really exciting, and it's a great idea that I thought came out of Amsterdam.
Given that this idea is using wastewater and it's getting closer to the human or to us, do you foresee that any type of regulation or pushback from, I don't know, legal point of view or any other point of view? Because, hey, wastewater, we know what is in there, is getting too close to the people, to the food, to what we consume.
Yeah, for sure. I think that you're right. You've really put your finger on it. And as much as people are excited about the prospects of this, I think that there could probably be a lot of pushback from that side, because, again, when you think about direct potable reuse, we have all this thing, toilet to tap, and people just get really icky about it, which is fair. And it's the same for greenhouses. If you're making food for human consumption, then you don't necessarily want it to have anywhere near your wastewater. But I think that, and yes, there could be some regulations there. But again, I think there's a lot of opportunities where, the wastewater doesn't necessarily come close to the greenhouses, for example, the energy, that kind of thing, that could definitely still be used, because that's really not really any direct contact. And I think that, again, there's some stakeholder engagement to be done here. And that's what we've been seeing with these utilities, is that, the more you talk to your community, the more you explain that it is safe and there are ways to do this circularity without obviously, upending health standards. That's something that we can do for sure. And actually, there's a good example in France recently in the last few months. France loosened its reuse regulations, so making it easier for utilities to use recycled water for industrial purposes. So I think that is something that, yes, there's a lot of barriers in society, and we want those barriers to still be up, because we still want to be protected, obviously, from a health perspective. But as technology kind of advances, I think that society will also be more accepting of this idea of water reuse and water recycling from wastewater.
At the end of the day, it's all about circularity. We already have been doing it with the stormwater, harvesting stormwater for irrigation, for other purposes that are not that close to humans. But hey, if we are really into circularity, well, sooner or later, we have to get to wastewater, and the source is there. I mean, the resource is there. What do we do with it?
Exactly.
I guess that's it. You mentioned France. And is it next year? Yeah, 2024, when the Olympics will be in Paris, right? And precisely in Paris, getting ready for the Olympic Games, because, on one hand, we have been listening, are the swimmers, the Olympic swimmers, really going to dive into the River Seine, or what's going to happen? I mean, nobody's promising anything, of course, down there. But yeah, we have some interesting news in these bathable rivers and the reuse.
Exactly, yeah. So there was a representative of the city of Paris at the Amsterdam International Water Week, and he was kind of there to say, yeah, we think we're going to make it. And it was really interesting to see, because obviously the Olympics has kind of been this catalyst for bathable rivers. But actually what he showed is that people used to swim in the Seine all the time back in the 19th century. It was kind of a normal thing to do. And as industrialization progressed and health standards progressed, that wasn't a thing anymore. And now the fact that we are reviving this idea of swimming in the Seine is really, I think, a positive for both for the livability of Paris as well. We were talking about earlier about droughts, about cities not necessarily becoming nice places to live during heat waves, and so that's something that really improves that. But it's all been driven by the plan to, I think it's a triathlon event for sure, maybe some other events as well during the Paris Olympics, to be done in the Seine. And what Paris is saying is that it's basically possible. I think it's possible 90 to 95% of the time. The only problem is if it rains. If there's kind of a big storm before the Olympic event, then I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. And I think that Paris have accepted that it's going to be very, very difficult to reach that point where the river will be 100% bathable all the time, even if there's just been a storm. But actually, they're quite happy with the point that they've reached, which is it's bathable most of the time, it's safe most of the time, and in summer you're unlikely to have a storm, and so they're hoping that it's going to be possible.
And whether they really hit the milestone, or this milestone of making it bathable during the Olympics, that would be great. But even if they may not, or they don't, and I guess that's the right direction. So for the future, for the years to come back to this, but what you mentioned at the beginning of or last century or 2 centuries ago, that was just a normal practice in the city. And good that we are going back to this, to this practice. Just jumping into natural source of water and enjoying it as well. Now here around the Nordics, we already have a nice white layer everywhere, and very soon the sea will freeze, so we will not be able to jump into the sea. Well, we can anyway. Yes, we do a hole and that's it. But that's
dig a hole in the ice and you go in the sauna and then you jump in the lake, right?
well, someday you have to go to Finland and you have to try. I mean, it's quite an experience. I can assure you that it's quite an experience. Either you will love it or you will hate it. There's no middle ground.
Something to tick off the bucket list, though, right? You've got to try it once in your life.
There you go. So for anyone, you need to come to Finland and do that. All right. Right. Following. there is a lot of discussion on the impact on climate change. Yes, heat waves, droughts happening all over the world. But what is the impact what comes to the water consumption? And there's this concern from the European utilities about the water demand falling. I mean, there are less consumption, but this is kind of a tricky thing to explain. Yeah, can you elaborate on this? What happens during the summer and where this paradox happens?
Yeah, it's a real dilemma for European utilities. And this was something that came out of the conversation. So I was talking about leading utilities of the world earlier. And when we had our leading utilities of the world workshop, which is when all these leaders come together, this was really the main focal point that they were worried about. So we had, particularly the head of Berlin Wasser, so the utility of Berlin, and also from Wittens, who are the biggest utility in the Netherlands. They had this concern. So the problem is that if they look at their water demand, so the water consumption throughout the year, that is actually dropping. And one of the reasons that they talked about was actually energy prices. And they said that, weirdly, that energy prices have more of an effect on water consumption than water prices. So, if your water is too expensive, it's actually because your energy is too expensive, because you're having a hot shower, you're using it for your dishwasher, your washing machine. So people will reduce their water consumption to lower their energy bill. So that's something that's happened, particularly in the last few years. We've seen, obviously, with the conflict in Ukraine, that's something that has kind of affected energy prices. So that's something that they're seeing. However, if they look at their peak consumption, so when the consumption is the highest, that's usually during the summer, that is actually becoming higher. So their peak demand is actually going up, and that's due to tourism. So obviously people visit those cities in the summer months, and that drives up water demand. But it's more than that. It's also the heat waves, right? So in Europe, we're seeing more and more heat waves during the summer in places that didn't necessarily used to have very many heat waves. I mean, I live in London. A heat wave here is like 25 degrees.
Oh, well.
But now, in London, the last few years, we've seen 30, maybe 33 degrees, which is something that we're not used to. And so when these heat waves hit in cities, people respond by more water. So that's like having maybe 2 cold showers a day. That's maybe, in the streets, the city will turn on the fountain so that people can cool down. So there's a lot of actually increased water demand during the summer, which sounds a bit contradictory, because the narrative that we hear during the summer is that, you've got to, there's a drought, so you've got to reduce your water demand. And there's all those images about dry riverbeds, and you've got to be really careful with your water. But the reality is that people actually need water during when it's hot to cool down. And, comes back to the discussion about swimming in the Seine. You need that water when it's hot. And so the question is, how do utilities manage this? Because if their water demand across the year is falling, that means that they're getting less money because people are using less water, so they're paying less for it. But then they still need to invest to be able to ensure that they have enough supply during the summer months when it's really hot. So it's really a really thorny issue that these utilities are grappling with. It's at a moment when people are using less water. How do we continue to invest? And when we're being asked to invest more and more, right? It's not just about water supply. Utilities are also having to invest for micropollutants, as we mentioned at the beginning, having to invest in
normal maintenance for leakages and then the normal running the business, which doesn't stop, whether it's summer or winter. I mean, they need to keep going on. I mean, to keep the kitchen working.
Exactly. So there's a lot that utilities need to pay for, and they're grappling with, well, maybe we're not getting as much money as we used to. So it's a really, really thorny issue, and I think it's brought a lot of conversations about how to get creative about tariffs and about revenue and about how to continue to invest when the situation is not necessarily favorable.
Well, quite a paradox there. And actually talking about economics, or talking about money. So how much money are the utilities handling, and how much money they need to invest? Talking about money, at the beginning, we spoke about the tariffs going up. And actually, that is our last story here. So in September, the Global Water Intelligence published its annual tariff survey, and the tariffs saw a sharp 8.2% in average increase across the world. The water is getting more expensive. should we say more expensive or less cheap?
Yes, that's a very good point. I think less cheap is definitely the right way to go. We consider, obviously we're biased in the water industry, but we think that water is too cheap. When you look at how much, as I said, water utilities need to invest, how capital heavy water is. I mean, I can give the example from the UK. At the moment, people may have heard that the UK water industry is kind of under fire. There's a lot of bad things going on and people are asking for change. And the water utilities are going to be presenting their 5-year plan. So kind of their 5-year plan of what they're going to do. And it's record investment. They're saying we're going to invest a lot of money in the next 5 years. And then they're saying, but to do that, we need to increase their tariffs. And suddenly people are not very happy, obviously, about tariffs increasing. But, the water utilities need that money. And it's really interesting. I think the tariff survey, we have been doing this for over 10 years now. So every year, every summer, we collect the tariffs for over 500 cities across the world. So it's, how much do people pay for water, wastewater, and stormwater combined? And the trend that we saw this year was really a sharp increase. So 8.2% is the average increase worldwide. That's really quite significant. It's usually kind of around 4 to 5%.
This 8.2% is compared to the previous year.
Yeah, so previous year was around, I think, 6%, although I'd have to check that.
But this spike came during the last year. And
yes,
if I don't know if you remember the numbers, but you mentioned at least during the past 10 years has been consistently increasing.
Yes.
Has been all the 10 years increasing, and this particular from last year to this is when we have this peak.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think it's the second highest peak we've had in the last 10 years is this 8%. And what's significant about this is actually it's interesting because obviously it's due to inflation. So we're having big inflation mechanisms at the moment. And luckily for water utilities, the water utilities are actually able to justify bigger increases because of inflation, because, people are seeing costs go up everywhere. So they kind of expect their tariffs to increase as well. So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of, social maybe acceptance of increasing tariffs because people expect costs to go up, even though the water utilities do need to keep affordability. Water, again, is seen as a human right. So the affordability question is really quite a big one, and it's very political. But inflation is enabling utilities to increase their tariffs. And they need to keep up, particularly with energy prices, because we know that one of the biggest costs for utility operations is energy. So as energy prices go up, water utilities need to keep pushing their tariffs up as well. We've seen a lot of utilities also come out of stagnation. So something that we see with the tariff survey is that there are a few places where utilities will go up, or utility tariffs will go up every year, but mostly they'll just stay the same, and a lot of places just won't change. And we've seen this year a lot of places that have not increased their tariffs for a long time suddenly having a big jump because it's necessary, because they've got to the point where they just can't delay.
It's not sustainable anymore.
Exactly.
Let alone because one of the things here would be the investment on new infrastructure, or actually just to renovate what they have current,
exactly.
the current assets that they have. So this increase, are we seeing it as this just catching up to keep afloat? Let's forget for a moment or for some time the investments, or is it that?
I think it depends where in the world, right? So in North America, for example, so in the US in particular, it is capital investment, which is encouraging. And there's been a lot of help for, water utilities on infrastructure. We had the infrastructure bill, utilities being encouraged for that. So in the US, there is the tariffs are going up to invest in infrastructure. However, it's more to fix and maintain aging infrastructure than it is to build new infrastructure. But it's still capital investment. In the sort of, in Asia and in South America, it is about service expansion. So it's really getting to cover the whole of the city, right? So in those places, you might only maybe 70% of the population is covered with water and wastewater services. So the main reason for increasing tariffs is to expand that service that you're providing. And in Europe, sadly, or I don't know, maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it means that our infrastructure in Europe is doing well. In Europe, it's more about operations. So utilities are increasing their tariffs to cover the costs, as I said, of energy, which is increasing, to cover the costs of, new treatment systems, which may be more expensive to treat micropollutants, that kind of thing. So it really depends where you look in the world. And it depends again on the energy prices. I think that Europe has been the most affected by the rise in energy prices, which is why their rise in water tariffs is more to cover the operational cost.
So there you go. I mean, everything is, many of these things are connected. Overall, the energy crisis, as you said, directly impacting. And this conversation about the water being too cheap or too expensive, depending on how you want to see it. This has been, already for a long time. And if you want to check, I believe it was episode 1 or episode 2 when we were discussing with Ilariajo back in Copenhagen at the International Water Association conference in 2022, was it? Yeah, September 2022. That was already a hot topic going around. And I remember one of the things is, okay, we may be paying too few, but maybe we want to keep it like that because in the long term may have not just a cost in the sense of money, a social cost. If we were making the people to pay for what really the water cost, what can be the social impact? How many people may, inadvertently, be left out? I'm not sure if that would be the case in Europe, but at large, that was the conversation. What is the social impact of really increasing the cost of the water?
Exactly. And I think it's a really, really difficult issue for sure. And, water is, when we look at SDGs, water is just fundamental, not just to SDG 6, which is the water SDG, but everything else. When we talk about health, poverty, climate, water is just associated with everything. And so how do you, like you say, keep water affordable so that the people, can continue to develop, but also having enough money to have that investment to create that infrastructure in the first place. It's really interesting. I mean, an example from California, which will maybe sound absolutely crazy to your European listeners. A lot in Europe, you have a lot of social tariffs, right? So it's cheaper for some people who can't afford water. In California, that's illegal. And so the water utility in LA, I think, has been sued for trying to implement a social tariff because you can't, use water from money from other ratepayers to pay other ratepayers, right? So you've got to have an equity between the equality between the ratepayers. So that's kind of a crazy thing. They're not allowed to do affordability tariffs, which I don't think we'd see that in Europe, but it just goes to show how difficult this affordability question is, and what do you do with people's money, and how do you invest it, and how do you still continue to be compliant with all these different regulations that are coming up.
Really complex issue, and as you said, depending where you are in the world, there are legal circumstances, there are different social circumstances. Absolutely, quite complex. Yeah. So I guess.
And one more idea one more idea I wanted to bring up on this because I think it's really interesting. So one of our Australian utilities that we inaugurated in leading utilities of the world, as I said, Urban Water in Amsterdam. So what they're trying to do, so we were talking about the value of wastewater, right? So the resources that you can get from your wastewater, and they are trying to put a monetary value on that. So what if I, as a water utility, can produce some fertilizer and then I can sell it and then I can get revenue from that. And that revenue will enable me to continue to invest and not have to increase my tariffs as much. So I think that's another idea. Again, there are some regulations that don't enable that, right? So the Swedish utility that we inaugurated said, well, we can't do that. We're not allowed to make money from resources, right? But in Australia, they can do that. And that's what they're trying to do. And they're trying to look for the most high value resources. So I think he was saying that they can produce biochar, and that biochar is then activated carbon, which can be used in sodium ion batteries that are then used for cars and that kind of thing. So, and that could actually be sold for quite a lot of money. So they're really looking to create that value from wastewater in the monetary sense. It's actual revenue from wastewater. So again, that's kind of another option, thinking outside the box, outside of tariffs. How can you generate more revenue? And I think that wastewater is a really good way of looking at that. Yeah.
Actually, creativity to improve circularity, creativity to get new services, creativity to get to reuse all this residual water. I mean, we don't stop for creativity. Sometimes the constraint comes from the legal framework. You mentioned, yes, we know, in the Nordics, in Sweden, certainly they will not be allowed to do that. This is not criticism at all, but it's just different circumstances in different parts of the world. Some is more regulated, some more liberal, should we say. But hey, creativity, we can see that utilities are doing their best to bring innovations, and hopefully they will be adopted widely.
Exactly.
All these
I think
examples
that's why
that you
it's
are
really
mentioning.
important. That's why it's really important to share these ideas from around the world, because, the utilities can see what other utilities are doing, but maybe the regulators can see it as well, and they can think, oh, maybe we can change legislation, or we can hope at least that maybe regulators will.
That may be a very long shot. Or they're not. Who knows? Because yet the regulations, different types of overall everything that has to do with environmental regulation that has been already going. Moving swiftly, as far as we know, in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Finland, it's a bit behind there, catching up, but it is moving. Maybe not as fast as we would like to, or as fast as the society may demand. But hey, we are moving. Right. So, Tallulah, this has been a really nice conversation. We touched lots of things, from innovation, from all the insights that you got from the Amsterdam International Water Week. We got specific examples, brilliant examples of utilities being innovative. Monies, that is always a thing. Money is always a factor. Tariffs increasing or not. Is it fair? Is it not? Is it too much? But hey, this has been really nice to have all this panorama of what has happened in the last weeks. All this information, I guess of course, it's on Global Water Intelligence website, where you can, of course, access to that. A very reduced summary. We will publish it on our show notes. But so anything you want to add, Tallulah, to all this plethora of information that we reviewed today?
No, you're right. We've covered a lot of ground, and I just want to, say well done to all the utilities and all the good work that everyone is doing, and all the innovations that we're seeing. You can check out all of our news on globalwaterintel.com. That's where we get all our news. If you're more interested in a certain region or a certain technology, you can find everything that we have there. So that was just a very small sample of the news that we've produced.
You have in Global Water Intel.com, you have divided by geographies, right? Where Americas, Europe.
So exactly. It's divided by region. So you can just go to the region. If you just want the Middle East, you can just have a look at the Middle East. If you're just interested in industrial water, you can just have a look at that as well. And the tariff survey is also available there's a sample there, and you can also, subscribe to get the whole tariff survey as well, which gives you a backlog of 10 years of tariffs from across the world, and it's a great resource.
Okay, great resource, and numbers, something that we always need to check. Thank you so much, Tallulah, and we will catch up next time, and thank you very much, Urbanistas, for listening, and see you next time.
That's great. Thank you, Daphne.
Thank you for listening to the Urbanista podcast, a production of Uponor Infra, the leader in sustainable infrastructure solutions. If you found it interesting, why don't you share it with your colleagues? We all together can move our industry forward.